Right, hello mate. It's rainy New York here.
It's sunny London here.
Good. We're never short of things to talk about on Media Snack, but every now and again, a story comes along that's kind of too big that it's just going to dominate everything else, I think, for quite a long time. And that's the news that dropped over the weekend that Martin Sorrell has stepped down as CEO of WPP. I found out when I landed on Saturday night. I landed in New York and landed to the news. There's been a lot of chatter over the weekend as to why WPP kind of, dropped the news. I think straight after the 10 o'clock news had completed in the UK. So there was also no chance to make the Sunday papers.
Yeah.
It kept a lot of the journalists busy over the weekend, and there's been lots of talk. So here we are on the Monday.
Yeah.
So just give us an update on quickly what's happened.
Well, Sir Martin had been under investigation through the board for some practices that were considered to be inappropriate for the CEO. I think they were looking at the misuse of assets. The findings were going to be made public, I think, or at least to the board this week. There is a board meeting at WPP tomorrow. And in anticipation of that, the news came out that Sir Martin had retired, in inverted commas, on Friday, and that has taken not only the media industry by storm, but the business community as a whole, because he has managed to transcend just the business pages, the trade press pages, but he's managed to become newsworthy to pretty much everybody out there that's either been reading a newspaper or watching a news report. Yeah.
So there's been already lots of discussion about tributes paid to him. I think it's in some places it's like he's died, but I think it's testament to the impact and the legacy, if you like, and the iconic status somewhat that he had across the industry. So tributes are flooding in. I noticed this morning that there is a little bit of there's a negative sentiment mostly coming out of the creative agency community, who felt that he'd in assembling lots of the creative assets in the 80s and the 90s. Yeah. There's some had damaged them. But generally, the sentiment has been positive, and we would share that. Having, I think, both worked for, I've worked for WPP agencies in a number of different agencies in different parts of the world, and you've worked with them as a client, and we now obviously collaborate closely with them as part of the work we do for advertisers. But the impact that he has made on the industry is massive. Because he's almost single-handedly changed the shape of the advertising industry globally, and has created a template really for what many others have copied.
That's right. But as a figurehead for the industry, he was all powerful, and so high profile that my initial reaction was not only one of massive surprise, because I never thought that this would happen in my career or in my lifetime. But at a time when the industry is in such confusion and a state of transition and change, he was somewhat of a reassuring figure in that role, knowing that Sir Martin was at the helm. He'd weathered plenty of pretty brutal storms in the 33 years that he was building up WPP into the enormous conglomerate and business that it is. The fact that he's no longer there, I find a little bit concerning, quite frankly. And I think a number of clients and perhaps agency leaders or media leaders within the industry will also kind of share that sense of not panic, but slight anxiety that somebody with that level of control and influence is no longer in that position.
Yeah. So in that role as he was leader of the industry in some respects, wasn't he? And I think you said when we talked yesterday, he was a very calming and rational influence on the industry when it needed to be, in an industry which is often emotionally charged.
Yeah.
Often he was the voice of reason that came over the top and kind of perhaps reassured people and was that stable, calming voice. That's gone. And so, I mean, I think in this episode, we're going to talk about in three areas. We've been discussing the legacy, which is important because there is a legacy there. It may not be the legacy that he would have wanted. It certainly isn't the legacy that he would have wanted. Secondly, I think we'll talk about the future and the implications for WPP, which we'll come on to now, because that's the big question. I think once the tributes and the legacy have been discussed, there's an urgent need to assess the future of the group. And then finally, let's talk about what advertisers, what the clients of WPP around the world will be thinking today, and maybe some questions that they're going to be asking across the coming weeks and months.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of the future, then this is a huge gap. I mean, I think you said it's a vacuum.
Yeah.
What do they do now?
Well, the first thing they need to do is they need to try and fill it. So
I didn't get the call. Did you get the call?
Didn't you? No, I didn't. Surprisingly, I'm sure it's on its way. I mean, what they've done is they've put in place obviously a temporary solution where they've got two chief operating officers that are going to try and kind of calm the waters. But ultimately, their role is to try and find somebody that can replace Sir Martin in the CEO role, and then his or her job will be to develop a strategy that can kind of take WPP forward, whatever that means. But the confusion around around a replacement for Sir Martin, I think, is doing that business no good whatsoever. So the first thing that they need to do is stabilize the position that they're at, and then find the right replacement for Sir Martin to take it forward. Yeah,
I mean, and that's going to be the tricky thing. I mean, I've got two little theories on this, and this is pure speculation. But I mean, there's now wild speculation everywhere, and there will be. That's not going to go away. For my 2 cents worth, given that I'm in New York, is it's a challenge because the business is so big. It's so big and complicated. It was designed by his hand, and he ran it in the way that he wanted to run the business, and it's a very complex organization. It's hundreds and hundreds of companies spread around the world. The skill set required to manage such a complex train set is going to require a FTSE 100 or a Fortune 100 global CEO. That's the skills required. So the idea of promoting one of the agency heads internally to suddenly become a FTSE 100 CEO and a global statesman is crazy, if that's the route. So if WPP continues to be the large conglomerate type business, I know that's a word that he never liked about it, but it's a big multi-divisional business. That's the skill sets can be required. Those people are hard to find from a standing start, and it will take them 12 months probably to get that. But they obviously need to move quickly if that's the way. The alternative kind of theory, which I'm perhaps more inclined to, is that the leadership of the group will probably could come from within, and maybe handed to a more creative leader, so an agency leader, a capable agency leader.
Yeah.
But I think the risk there is that the group is too big to be controlled by somebody who is not a Martin Sorrell. So I think there's been calls for the breakup of WPP, and maybe investors, and analysts far smarter than us will understand maybe reasons why that might happen. I'm not sure that it will cause a breakup, but I think to actually segment the business into smaller parts, a bit like Google did years ago by establishing the Alphabet group. I think that seems perfectly reasonable, actually, and to hand smaller parts of the group and particular disciplines to certain leaders within who would be able to manage a smaller part of the group, perhaps.
Yeah, but I mean, either direction, the board needs to decide how they're going to play it really quickly, because as you rightly said, it's that sense of kind of confusion, ambiguity that is only going to become worse and permeate throughout the client organizations, the agencies, and then the client organizations. The people that it affects are obviously the clients, but also the personnel within their respective agencies, because they have always defaulted to Sir Martin as a kind of leader of the group. And in absence of that, there is going to be some kind of doubt and perhaps panic spreading within their organization. So the sooner they can make that decision and then decide as to what strategy is best to move WPP forward, the better for the group.
Yeah. So that's important. I expect that they'll have to start making some announcements. We've heard over the weekend, we had some correspondence with some senior people, WPP and group companies, with words of reassurance, saying business as usual, no knee-jerk reactions, and they have faith in the leadership and all this stuff. And you had a very timely interview this morning.
That's right. Yeah. No, I met Christian Yule, who's the global CEO of Essence, which is one of the 4 kind of network agencies within Group M, and he was over from the States, and we'd arranged to have a catch up. He's attending, I think, an important board meeting with WPP tomorrow, and this was planned ages ago. And we had a chat, and whilst he wasn't at liberty to kind of disclose kind of any news around the announcement this weekend, I think probably because he didn't know it, I asked him what his reaction was, what his narrative was, and that of the other agency leaders to their clients, and he said it's just one of reassurance. It's business as usual. The senior leadership, the board, will take care of the situation at board level, at CEO level. Their responsibility is to make sure that their clients feel reassured, and that their respective agencies are doing everything they can to fulfill the obligations of those kind of contracts. So he seemed pretty philosophical and pretty calm. Yeah.
And that seems quite consistent with what's coming out from other parts of the group as well. So, as you'd expect. So, the future of the business, we'll see what happens in the coming weeks and months. But somebody has to come out with a clear vision. I think one of the things, I think I mentioned it earlier. Horizontality was one of the Martin Sorrell's catchphrases or buzzwords. And that was his idea, to try and get the different component parts of WPP to work more closely together in an integrated way. And he's famously architected a number of what they call client teams within WPP, where multiple WPP different agencies across different disciplines collaborate under a rebranded kind of agency to service some major global advertisers, and they are some have been successful, some less so, but WPP have been very big on that. We know that horizontality, though, as a strategy, didn't really work too well. There was, because despite the ambition perhaps that he had, WPP structure never really changed very much to enable that, and so I think it still remains quite a siloed business. Now, when you remove the giant controlling leadership from that, it has risk perhaps that the agencies have no incentive to collaborate, or less incentive to collaborate, because they're not being held in that healthy tension anymore. So we might see in the coming weeks and months perhaps I don't know, just some tensions that occur between different parts of the business. And that's the thing, perhaps when we talk now about the impact for advertisers, that might be the thing that would worry you, right? If you were a major advertiser of WPP, particularly if it was across multiple disciplines, just how those disciplines are going to interact with each other now.
Yeah, and continue to collaborate. And you've also got to remember that Group M and WPP are fighting a number of big, high-profile pitches on a different number of kind of angles. I mean, that's just the nature of being such an enormous, big, media network. But also, we know that this year's pretty frantic when it comes to kind of pitches, and they are going to have to convince agencies that are tendering their business that the next 3 or 5 year kind of contractual term is going to remain pretty positive and pretty calm. And the guys that are going in to present and convince these brands that Group M or WPP should be the right agency group to look after them could probably do without this. They're going to have to neutralize this first and then deliver against, you know, the requirements of the brief. So that's going to be challenging. But I mean, there's some extremely experienced and you know, excellent media leaders within the organization, and they'll be adept at I'd imagine, or adept at, you know, delivering that kind of message. But that's something that they could probably do without, I'm sure.
Yeah. And that's a big decision. I mean, if you're a multinational advertiser and you've got hundreds of millions or billions of dollars worth of media billings in play, you know, there are some big pitches going on at the moment. There are some big pitches, you know, we're anticipating across this year. We've said it's going to be very busy, particularly in media. You know, if you have WPP agencies in the mix, you're talking about, you know, perhaps 2, 3, 5 year commitments, right? You know, we're talking here only, you know, 24 hours or so after the news, but you know, if you're an advertiser that's putting maybe Group M agencies through a pitch, you're going to want to quickly ask the question, you know, what is WPP going to look like
exactly
in 12, 18 months time? You know, will it exist? You know, what am I actually buying into? And there's so much money at stake. Those are going to be very tricky questions that will naturally be on the minds of some major advertisers now that are currently pitching, and those that are, you know, about to start a pitch. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, and that's the issue, and it will, you know, perhaps embolden the other agency groups that are competing. You know, Martin Sorrell was such a powerful influence and such a force that, you know, in some pitches, you know, they would go in a goal ahead, if you like, you know, simply because of his influence and his charisma within those kind of relationships. But it will be really interesting. These are kind of challenging times, but I think the point you made is absolutely right. Advertisers going into pitches now will need to be reassured that there is a 2, 3, 4, 5 year future for WPP before they kind of sign on that dotted line.
Yeah. Good. Well, I mean, this is, you know, this is yet again, it's another big story, which feels like it's really the end of something. It really, you know, everybody said end of an era, but it is an end of an era. It's the man that took the industry from the Mad Men days into the Math Men days. And he was largely the architect for that and had such a huge influence, but it is the end. Now it's the beginning of something new. It really is the beginning of certainly significant change at WPP, and likely to be a change in what's been known as the holding company model. You know, it's not going to disappear, but I think there will be a really interesting blueprint that comes out of WPP that inevitably will be, you know, influential across the global industry. It's something that we'll keep coming back to, but I guess, you know, we wish Sir Martin well in his retirement with his new baby, and I'm sure he's going to be very busy on that score. Okay, I might be able to guess the answer to this one, but tell me a good week for.
A good week, certainly a good weekend for Artur Sadoun, the global CEO of Publicis. I mean, he must have just thought all of his Christmases had come at once. I mean, this is a man that's leading a holding group that always is competing against WPP and Group M. He's well in his way in terms of transforming that organization behind the kind of the platform of One Publicis. You know, they seem to have successfully transitioned from you know, his predecessor to kind of a new youthful kind of leader of the holding group, and it feels as though it's a holding group and a set of agencies in the ascendancy, and so he must be kind of rubbing his hands with glee. But if there was a more expensive bottle of champagne opened in Paris this weekend, I'd be somewhat surprised.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes Publicis Group's succession plan look just seamless and textbook. You know, so yeah, I'm sure he's got a good week ahead.
Okay, and it's been a bad week for.
Well, it's been a bad week. I mean, it's amazing how much stuff goes on, doesn't it? I mean, it's been a bad week for Facebook. A week can't go by without talking about Facebook. But just within the last 7 days, so much has happened. As you'll know, Mark Zuckerberg was called to appear before the committees at the Senate and at Congress, and it was just farcical. He was subject to 5 hours of questioning on subsequent days, and actually handled himself very well. I mean, he was incredibly exposed and vulnerable. Potentially to accusation, but who'd have thought then the senators actually had not been briefed, didn't really know what they were asking him. So it was somewhat comical. So he handled himself well, but the prevailing narrative after these hearings is frankly less at the moment about mistakes at Facebook and just the incompetence or lack of competence, should say, amongst the questions from the government. So he's due to go now to be grilled by European Parliament, and with GDPR regulations coming in, we're expecting this to be slightly more stringent. But I've got this wacky conspiracy theory that maybe Sorrell and Zuckerberg should swap places. I think they'd be quite a good fit. Sorrell to be now an acceptable face of Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg to lead a turnaround and modernization of WPP. I think I might put some money on that.
You get brilliant odds, I think, on that.
Yeah, and I hear, thanks to the Wall Street Journal, that Sorrell does not have a non-compete clause in his contract. So if you can just ping him a list of current vacancies, which you never know. Right, question of the week. Where will WPP's next CEO come from?
Will they hire from within, from outside, or whatever?
Great. You can vote up in the corner, but that's your Media Snack special for this week. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, but bye for now.
See you next time.